It's time for Defending and Commending the Faith with Joe Mott, inviting the atheist, agnostic, and skeptic to examine for themselves the evidence for the Christian faith. We are all limited by what we do not know and by the things we think we know but are not true. Dr. Joe Mott earned his PhD at LSU and was a distinguished math professor at Florida State University for 38 years, helping to write 3 math textbooks and authoring over 30 research articles in math. He is now the host of this radio program, Defending and Commending the Faith. Here is Joe Mott.
Thank you for joining our program today. Followers of Christ are still being called into action for defending and commending the Christian faith. Who is Jesus Christ? Few people question whether Jesus Christ actually existed, but most people accept that Jesus was truly a man who lived in the nation of Israel approximately 2,000 years ago. Almost every major religion teaches that Jesus was either a prophet, Islam for example, or a moral teacher or a godly man. But the Bible tells us that he was infinitely more. But the debate begins when some claim he was divine. In his book, Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis writes the following: I am trying here to prevent anyone from saying the really foolish thing that people often say about him. I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. That is the one thing we must not say. A man who was merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on the level with a man who says he is a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool. You can spit at him and kill him as a demon. Or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come up with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that option open to us. He did not intend to. Who did Jesus claim to be? Who does the New Testament say he is? First, he is God in human flesh. I have previously listed 9 different situations where we can infer Jesus was divine. On 2 occasions in the Gospel of John, Jesus said something that caused the Jews to try to stone him. In chapter 8, verse 58, Jesus said, Before Abraham was, I am. And in chapter 10, verse 30, he said, I and the Father are one. Jesus was truly claiming equality with God the Father. When the Jews were asked their reasons for stoning him, they replied, For blasphemy, because you, a mere man, claim to be God. Jesus never tries to defend himself by saying to them, I never claim to be God. Other scriptural clues that Jesus is divine include John chapter 1, verse 1, which says, The Word was God, coupled with John chapter 1, verse 14, which says, The Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. When Jesus' disciple Thomas declared him to be my Lord and my God, Jesus did not correct him. When his disciple Peter said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God," Jesus did not scold him, but said, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven." The Apostle Paul says Jesus is our great God and Savior. The Apostle Peter called Jesus our God and Savior. If you read Hebrews chapter 1, verses 8 through 13, you will see that God the Father bears witness to Jesus' true identity as having an eternal throne and in the beginning as having laid the foundation of the earth. Jesus fulfilled the scriptures which recorded multiple prophecies about the Jewish Messiah. They predicted one who would be born in the line of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Judah, Jesse, and David. The entire Bible is about Jesus. Every book of the Bible refers to him in some specific way. The Old Testament can be summed up as saying, Jesus is coming. The New Testament says, Jesus has come. There is more written about Jesus than about Tiberius Caesar, the Roman emperor from 1437 AD. In the website gotquestions.org, the question is asked, why is the question of Jesus' true identity so important? Why does it matter whether Jesus is God? They say there are several reasons. C.S. Lewis pointed out, if Jesus is not God, then Jesus is the worst of liars and untrustworthy in every way. If Jesus is not God, then the apostles would likewise be liars. Jesus had to be God because the Messiah was promised to be the Holy One, Isaiah chapter 49, verse 7. Since no one is righteous before God, Psalms chapter 143, verse 2, and Romans chapter 3, verse 10, God himself had to enter the world as a human. If Jesus is not God, his death would have been insufficient for the sins of the whole world. Only God himself could provide an infinite, eternally valuable sacrifice. God is the only Savior. Hosea chapter 13, verse 1. Compare that with 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 3. If Jesus is to be the Savior, then he must be God. Jesus had to be both God and man. As God, Jesus could satisfy God's wrath. As the God-man, Jesus is the perfect mediator between heaven and earth. As Jesus proclaimed, "No one comes to the Father except through me," he is implying he is Savior. And since God is the only Savior, therefore, Jesus is God. In the last episode of this program, I began discussing the 10 known ancient non-Christian sources who wrote about Jesus that are listed in the book I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist by Norman Geisler and Frank Turek. We have discussed Thallus, who is perhaps the earliest non-Christian writer to refer to Jesus. Of the remaining 9 writers that Geisler and Turek mentioned, I quote only a few of their comments about Jesus, Christianity, or the facts that are consistent with the gospel accounts. Second, allow me to elaborate on what the historian Flavius Josephus wrote about Jesus. According to Bart Ehrman, Josephus is far and away our best source of information about first century Palestine. Josephus twice mentions Jesus in his book, Antiquities of the Jews, the massive 20-volume history of the Jewish people that was written around 93 to 95 AD. It corroborates what the Gospels say about Jesus. Ultimately, Josephus became the greatest Jewish historian of his time. He was born into a priestly family and became a Pharisee at the age of 19. Also, he was a military commander in Galilee during the first Jewish revolt against Rome between 66 and 70 AD. After surviving a battle against the Romans, he served the commander of the Roman army, Vespasian, in Jerusalem. After the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, he moved to Rome, where he became the court historian for Vespasian, who had become the emperor of Rome. Although Josephus was not a follower of Jesus, Lawrence Mikitiuk says he was around when the early church was getting started, so he knew people who had seen and heard Jesus. So Josephus would have known people who were eyewitnesses of Jesus' life and deeds. Josephus also adds, there was a wise man who was called Jesus. His conduct was good, and he was known to be virtuous. And many people from among the Jews and the other nations became his disciples. Pilate condemned him to be crucified and to die. But those who had become his disciples did not abandon his discipleship. They reported that he had appeared to them 3 days after his crucifixion, and that he was alive. Accordingly, he was perhaps the Messiah, concerning whom the prophets have recounted wonders. Josephus also mentions Jesus in another passage of Antiquities of the Jews. There, Josephus recounts the unlawful execution of James and identifies James as the brother of Jesus, who is called Messiah. Josephus revealed how the new high priest of the Jews, Ananus the Younger, took advantage of a gap in Roman rule to kill James in 62 AD, 3 months before his successor, Albinus, could get to Judea. This gap allowed Ananus the time to do his dirty deed. Josephus describes the incident. Albinus was upon the road, so he, Ananus the high priest, assembled the Sanhedrin of the judges and brought before them the brother of Jesus, who was called the Christ, whose name was James, and some others, his companions. And when he had formed an accusation against them as breakers of the law, he delivered them to be stoned. In addition to Jesus and James, the brother of Jesus, Joseph mentions John the Baptist. Third, the British Museum owns the manuscript of a letter written by a Syrian man named Mara Bar-Serapion, a private citizen who was writing from prison to motivate his son Serapion to emulate wise teachers and a wise king, circa 73 AD. While Jesus is not explicitly mentioned, it is almost certain the Father is referring to Jesus as the executed wise king. Remember that the title King of the Jews was used by Pilate. Roman soldiers and even some Jews themselves refer to Jesus as the King of the Jews. When Jesus was crucified, the written charge was seen by everyone in the crowd: Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews, as found in John chapter 19, verse 19. Allow me to close this episode by reminding you, exercise daily. Walk with God.
Thank you for listening to Defending and Commending the Faith with Joe Mott, a production of Wave 94 Radio in Tallahassee, Florida. If you have any questions or comments for Joe, please forward them to Doug Apple at Wave94 at this email address, dougapple@wave94.com. And be sure to join us every Monday evening at 6:45 p.m. on Wave 94 and subscribe through your favorite podcast app. Defending and Commending the Faith with Joe Mott.